Before I begin, I want to thank my sponsor, Ratalaika Games, for providing a review code. Scurge Hive is finally available on modern platforms for the first time in 19 years, and you can pick it up on Steam or your console of choice for $15. Thank you once again to Ratalaika Games. Now, let's get on with the video. Okay, let's get something out of the way. If you've ever heard of this game before, it's likely because of the Girafferies video on Scurge Hive that came out a few months before this one. That video did such a good job on selling me the game that I looked it up online, found a Steam page for the then upcoming re-release, and then followed the publisher, Ratalaika Games, on Blue Sky so I could request a review code. So, at minimum, we can say I was excited for this. Hopefully other videos on my channel have already shown that I appreciate a lot of retro games, even the ones that others might consider flawed. In fact, I might actually be more drawn to cult classics or games with good potential but flawed execution. It's easy to like a game that was always popular, but sometimes it's more fun to be the one-woman fan club. That offer to buy Smashing Drive still stands, by the way. We don't often think about the survival rate of media, especially in the internet age. We like to believe that because of the pervasiveness of the internet, nothing can truly be lost or forgotten. But that's not really the case, as someone who's ever tried to find an unpopular show can attest. Sometimes there just aren't a lot of people keeping the torch lit for the underdog, and you just have to hope that one of them is currently seeding the only available torrent. This is why, on a fundamental level, I appreciate the re-release of less popular games like Scurge Hive. Making these games available on modern storefronts allows them to come back into the conversation and hopefully get a re-evaluation. Maybe this time they won't be cult classics. Maybe now enough people will see their potential and ask for a remake or a sequel. Maybe now someone will finally draw some spicy fan art of your obscure Blorbo. But that's about the 100th time I've waxed poetic about game preservation. It's almost like it's some kind of running theme on my channel. How does Scurge Hive stack up in this modern re-release? The first thing you might notice is the derivative nature of Scurge Hive. Even the video that inspired me to track down the game pointed out how much Scurge was copying Metroid's homework. Jenosa is so clearly modeled after Samus that I wouldn't be surprised if she claims Miss Erin as her transition goals. Does she want to be like Samus or want to be with Samus? It's probably both. Still, I'm no stranger to enjoying derivative works. It's a common aphorism that the best artists steal, and let's be real, one of the most popular types of indie game is spiritual successor to the game you loved as a child. Derivative work does not need to be considered an insult. Bug Fables pulls a lot from Paper Mario, and Advent Neon wears its Sonic inspirations on its sleeve, and I still highly recommend those games. Outside takes on existing ideas are great because we can see those ideas evolve and sometimes even become genres unto themselves. Scurge Hive is able to carve out a unique identity despite giving a guy who only ever played Metroid Fusion energy. Aside from the obvious shift to an isometric perspective, the big way Scurge Hive stands out in the Metroidvania genre is through its elemental abilities. In most Metroid games I've played, weapon upgrades are more about adding extra damage and effects to your arsenal, rather than picking up weapons tailored to specific enemy types. Obviously, there are some exceptions, but generally, gun kills every enemy in Metroid, and the upgrade is just about how fast it kills. In Scurge Hive, they've introduced full-on type matchups. Yes, not content to take inspiration from one series, Scurge adds a healthy dose of Pokemon to the mix. Except instead of catching them all, you're killing them. With the type matchups, selecting the right weapon kills specific enemy types faster, but selecting the wrong one actually boosts their attack power. Don't zap the jellyfish, it just makes them suck harder. Scurge also has a healthy dose of environmental puzzles. A lot of them are centered around pulling blocks with the grappling hook. Eventually, you'll gain a freeze ability that allows you to turn enemies into movable blocks. And at that point, it's almost like you're taking your weird dog out for a walk. Don't mind us, just trying to find the nearest button so he can do his business. Actually, on the subject of the freeze ability, I think it should have been modified. I don't have photosensitivity, but the flashing animation was still irritating. I imagine this ability, since it is so necessary to completing the game, might be enough to turn away photosensitive players. Toning down the flashing really does seem like a completely missed accessibility feature that would have only served to widen the audience. Unlike Metroid, there are no upgrades that you can miss. Metroid will often have extra missile tanks and health boosts, but every upgrade is treated as an essential pickup in Scurge Hive. The only potential point of difference between runs is how much health you have. Scurge features a level up system whereby killing more enemies allows Jenosa to gain experience that eventually turns to more health. Depending on how frequently you engage with enemies, how often you have to backtrack to find an essential key, and how willing you are to grind, you can end the game with a different level each playthrough. Unfortunately, part of Scurge Hive's difficulty stems from its platform of origin, the Game Boy Advance. This game clearly wants to be a 3D Metroidvania adventure, but it came from a console that was primarily 2D. The isometric perspective is fine most of the time, but when it comes to platforming, it can cause you to miss jumps that would be much easier to judge in a 3D game. How high a wall is, the precise direction you need to launch off a grapple point, and even where a pickup is in relation to your character all suffer because an isometric perspective made from pixel art inherently lacks depth perception. Aiming can also suffer since you're locked to 8-directional movement, but the enemies are not. Your shots have fairly wide and generous hitboxes, but enemies can still sometimes hide in the space between west and northwest. With how well executed everything else is, I feel this game is begging for a remake just so it can exist beyond its limitations. With proper 3D modeling, analog movement, and perhaps camera control, Scurge Hive could easily be a genre-defining game. Well, maybe someday we'll see Ratalaika publish exactly that remake, or perhaps we'll see an independent game which takes inspiration from and iterates upon Scurge Hive, just as Scurge did with Metroid. Funnily enough, when credits roll, the game ends with a "to be continued" message. I guess Orbital Media were sure they'd get a sequel one day. Well, if we can get enough people interested in the game, maybe that can actually happen one day. Who knows? I'd certainly be interested in playing another adventure in this series. The other majorly difficult portion to note is the final boss. I was definitely making liberal use of the save state feature. The first phase is really easy, the second is a little harder, and the third is, well, it's downright disorienting. Without spoiling it, there's a pretty easy way to beat the final phase, but it may require banging your head against it and stumbling into the answer. I would recommend saving between the phases of the final boss to avoid the extra frustration of having to do each phase all over again after every death. Now, unfortunately, there are some negatives to this re-release of Scurge Hive that aren't related to the original game. Firstly, controller mapping doesn't seem to be handled well. I'm supposed to be able to remap inputs, but anytime I try to change the input I use on my controller, it just won't let me change it. I also run into an issue where sometimes the game insists I'm holding the control stick in the complete opposite direction to where I'm actually pointing it, forcing me to try and wrestle control back. This kind of thing typically happens in other games if the cord gets suddenly yanked out of my controller, but I had no spontaneous disconnects and still experienced this problem. I even ran into this during the second phase of the final boss, where the game would just decide to pull me directly to the left side of the screen and leave me vulnerable to all kinds of attacks. The port quality also needs to be tightened up as well. Occasionally I'll run into stuttering here and there, usually making a crunched frame or two. One time though, the frame rate dipped so horribly that the game slowed down and started making terrible noises. I'm not sure how this port or emulation is set up, but I hope that Ratalaika put in more work to polish their retro releases. In a lot of cases, these are the only second chances these games will get, so you really want to put your best foot forward to make the games easier to recommend. Covering Scurge Hive has honestly put me back into some familiar territory. If you remember all the way back in my video on Smashing Drive, that game is more or less abandoned since it was developed by a company that has moved on from making video games. Scurge Hive is a similar story. Guileco moved on from making games like Smashing Drive to make electronic dartboards, but Orbital Media, the developer of Scurge Hive, apparently went defunct in 2014. The name Orbital Media now directs to a European AI company. Gross. Despite any criticisms I may have, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Scurge Hive. And if someone from Ratalaika Games is listening in on this video, I would like to drop a suggestion for another hidden gem from the Game Boy Advance that you could set your sights on acquiring and porting. There's a game near and dear to my heart, which I believe deserves a second chance, much like what you've given to Scurge Hive. And that game is Lady Sia. I'll save my full thoughts on that game for another video, but suffice it to say that I think Lady Sia deserves her flowers. RFX Interactive, the game's developer, also went bankrupt, so tracking down and acquiring the rights might have some difficulties. Still, I think it's worth the effort to get more eyes on Lady Sia, as well as possibly see an actual re-release for the reportedly finished but unreleased sequel. Honestly, if Ratalaika were to pull off some form of re-release, especially one that publishes Lady Sia 2, Sword of Sia, they wouldn't need to send me a review code. I'd have that pre-order locked down on day one. Obviously, I'd still appreciate a review code if they were feeling so generous, but I'd take any chance to hype up Lady Sia's return even if it meant buying 10 copies of the game myself. But with all of that being said, this is where my video ends. I really enjoyed playing through Scurge Hive, and I think you should give the game a shot. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll return for the next video. And thank you once again to Ratalaika Games for providing the review code. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to working on my 1000-page Samus Aran Jenosa Armor fem/fan fiction. Combining their powers for one final shot, Samus and Jenosa pointed their weapons at the insectoid queen and fired straight into its heart. The blast flew true, hitting its target. The massive alien screamed and writhed in pain, the energy from the attack coursing inside it. The queen pulsed and undulated until it finally exploded. Alien guts and viscera flew everywhere, coating the bounty hunters' power suits. The alien goo proved to be acidic and quickly began eating away at the hunters' armor. Thinking quickly, Jenosa used her combustion weapon to clear away some of the acid and form a safe zone. Samus quickly ejected her Varia suit off of her body, and Jenosa did much the same with her own armor. The acid was no longer a threat, but they were much more exposed to the elements, having just stripped down to their much lighter jumpsuits. Thankfully, Samus's ship arrived quickly, providing some much-needed shelter and an escape from the hostile planet. The two women panted wordlessly aboard the ship, their breath hot from the exertion of the previous battle and their skin drenched in sweat. Samus stared deeply into Jenosa's eyes. Jenosa was transfixed by Samus's deep azure irises. Their breathing slowed. Jenosa became aware of a tension in the room, and a thought occurred to her. No, she better not entertain that idea. Surely it was all in her head, and Miss Aaron couldn't possibly be thinking the same thing. Suddenly, they were on each other, each clinging furiously to the other's body, their lips interlocked. Everything was uncomfortably warm, sweaty, and sloppy, and yet it all felt exactly right.